It's been 7 months since 3-year-old Elijah Vu went missing in northeast Wisconsin. And now, the little boy's remains are finally recovered. But there's still so many unanswered questions in this case, like how did Elijah get there? How long has he been there? And above all, how did he die? We're taking a closer look at the tragic story of Elijah Vu and where the investigation is headed from here. Now, we've talked about Elijah Vu multiple times here on Law & Crime, dating back to February, and that's when he first went missing. He was last seen on Tuesday, February 20th in Two Rivers, Wisconsin, which is about 30 minutes south of Green Bay. So at that time, Elijah was staying with Jesse Vang. That's his mother, Katrina Baur's boyfriend. And according to court docs, Katrina Baur dropped her son off with Jesse Vang, who planned to keep the boy for about a week. And the purpose of this visit was simple: to teach the 3-year-old how to be a man. We learned a lot about this through the original criminal complaint, that Vang referred to this discipline as timeouts, but then compared them to boot camp. This included things like making Elijah stand up for 3 hours at a time and then repeatedly chant, "I'm sorry, mommy." Vang also threatened Elijah with cold water, and this is something he knew that Elijah was scared of. And now, an amended criminal complaint paints an even darker picture about Vang and Katrina Baur's alleged abuse. Days before Elijah went missing, quote, Katrina Baur and Jesse Vang begin discussing Katrina coming to Jesse's apartment for sex. Jesse says that Katrina cannot see victim child 1, that's Elijah, when she gets to the apartment, and that victim child 1, Elijah, can be placed in the bathroom while they have sex. A few days later, disturbing text messages were sent between the pair when Jesse Vang messages Katrina Baur, quote, "I told you to trust me. I'ma make sure he hates me and being here." She responded, quote, "Don't want him to hate you, just fear you." Jesse then responds, "It's okay, someone had to be the bad person." It's also important to note that Katrina Baur actually lived in the Wisconsin Dells. That's in the central part of the state. She'd put Elijah in the care of Jesse Vang, who lived in northeast Wisconsin in the city of Two Rivers. That's about 3 hours from the Dells. So it was there in Two Rivers where Jesse Vang first reported Elijah missing. Now, according to Vang, he woke up at about 7:30 the morning of February 20th. After he took his son to the school bus, he and Elijah went into the bedroom of their apartment, where Elijah was, quote, told to stand and pray near the foot of Vang's bed. He did not change the toddler's diaper as he was too tired. Elijah was not allowed to do fun things as he was in timeout. That's when Vang says he decided to take a nap. And court documents state that while Vang was sleeping, he would, quote, lock the door to the apartment at the doorknob, deadbolt, and with a security chain attached at the top of the door to keep victim from walking out of the apartment. But when Vang woke up 3 hours after he first took that nap, he says Elijah was gone. That led to a statewide Amber Alert for Elijah that was active until just this month. Local and federal authorities searched the area near where Elijah went missing and used almost every tactic you can imagine. Investigators searched by air, land, and even water as Two Rivers pushes up against Lake Michigan. There was also a large presence of volunteers that aided in the search, and it lasted for months. The immediate concern was that Elijah went missing in February in Wisconsin. And while the day he went missing was more mild than usual, he was still a small boy, standing only 3 feet tall and weighing just 45 pounds. And as the search for Elijah continued, both Katrina Baur and Jesse Vang were arrested and charged with child abuse. Law&Crime was actually in the courtroom when new charges were presented against Baur. Prosecutor Jacqueline LeBray explained Baur's new charges, alleging abuse against both 3-year-old Elijah and another child, age 6.
These cases obviously involve the care of some very young children. One of the children is around the age of 3, the other is around the age of 6. And not only were we dealing with the defendant sending the child to Two Rivers for discipline, or the boot camp as they described it, to make that child fearful of the co-actor so that when the child returns to her residence, he would behave better. There is also evidence that on February 14th, she left the 6-year-old unattended in a vehicle for approximately an hour in cold weather. The temperature around that time was around probably 27 to 30 degrees with the vehicle turned off. Then we have also, as part of count one, the chronic neglect on February 16th, leaving the 3-year-old unattended for at least an hour as her and the other co-actor are traveling to locations in the city of Manitowoc, and neither one of them are seen with the child.
At the same hearing, prosecutors alleged Baur told Vang not to cooperate with law enforcement.
It's clear that this defendant is facing some serious charges and there is grave concern. She knows she's facing potential imprisonment, which is an incentive to flee. She also was encouraging the co-actor not to cooperate with law enforcement.
Katrina Baur's mother even spoke out against her own daughter, making a harrowing statement.
At this time, rather than aligning in locating her son, she feels the need to reiterate what a good guy Jesse is and is fully defending him and his actions. By aligning with him, she could potentially have access to his extended family and ability to flee the area. Katrina routinely will blame anyone and everyone for what happens without taking responsibility for her actions. It goes without saying she is incapable of making appropriate judgments in everyday life.
So that court hearing we just played you was from back in March, and it's the same month when a blanket belonging to Elijah was found about 4 miles from where he was last seen. But for several months, that's almost all we knew about the case. There were still volunteers searching the area, but really no concrete information about where Elijah could be. Then on September 7th, a skull and bones were discovered in a thick wooded area just a few miles from where Elijah went missing. It was quickly determined they were human remains.
The remains were found on private property by a person getting his land ready for the hunting season. This location is just over 3 miles northwest of where he originally was reported missing. This area had been searched several times. This had been reported by law enforcement searches, by private searches, by the landowner, by air, and with various search and rescue teams. Despite all those previous efforts and throughout different conditions and changing seasons, we continued searching and even had continued searches scheduled as early as next week. The remains found by the hunter and recovered by law enforcement were taken to the Wisconsin Crime Lab for DNA testing.
At the time the remains were found, investigators said it would be a lengthy process to identify them. But on September 13th, they made a difficult announcement.
It is with a heavy heart that I announce to you today, those remains were identified as Elijah Booth.
Two Rivers police announced that the Amber Alert had been canceled and a missing persons investigation had become a death investigation. The department didn't answer any questions and made no mention of Elijah's cause of death or whether Elijah's mom and her boyfriend could face charges. With so many unanswered questions still on the table, I reached out to retired NYPD detective Tom Smith. Obviously, this area has been searched many times. It's been about 7 months since this little boy went missing, so there's been air searches, land, water, all over, and this specific area had actually been searched before. So why wouldn't they have found his remains before?
Well, you know what? It depends on who is searching. If you have just civilians who are kind of looking around, not knowing how a pattern search is done, how to lay out, coordinates and kind of mark where you're searching, and not faulting them for that. They're doing a tremendous job volunteering to try to find this young boy. But, could a 3-year-old who is only 3 feet tall in a little area be overlooked? Sure, it could. Unfortunately, but a lot depends on who is doing it, and you're not going to see the remains of that small of a child from from the air or anything like that. That's got to be really upfront and close.
As far as the remains, the time lapse from when he went missing to when they're found is really the big question for me because, as I said, it's been 7 months, and I'm wondering the amount of decay over that amount of time. Is there still enough information 7 months later that investigators can collect and learn things like cause of death?
That's going to be tough. If the cause of death had something to do with a break of a bone or something in his vertebrae or even his skull, that will be able to be seen and analyzed. If there's anything skin wise that might have decayed away, it'll be tougher. But you know what? The experts are going to have it now. The people who do this for a living to try to find causes of death in people are going to look high and low and try to nail that down.
And one of the things I'm just thinking, because I'm somewhat familiar with this area, and it was found on hunting property where a hunter was going to prepare his land. So it's kind of rural, this area. And obviously there's animals, deer, raccoons, etc. Is it possible that the scene could have been disturbed at all? Maybe not by humans, but by animals?
100%. And that happens quite often. Even you know, what had happened to his body may be a result of the animals as well. And they'll be able to determine that in, the investigation of the remains.
Moving forward, the Wisconsin Department of Justice of Criminal Investigation is leading the investigation into Elijah's death. Will they be able to determine how long the remains have been outside, even though the condition we're not entirely sure about it? Could we nail down maybe time of death or time since they were placed there?
They're going to give an estimate. They'll be able to determine because of the decay of it. They can pin down a good time frame of when that decay started.
Taking a closer look at the information from local police, there are still some question marks about that investigation. So initially, we got reports that remains had been found in this Two Rivers area. And investigators at the time made an announcement and said, yes, it's around where Elijah Vu went missing. However, we can't confirm that it's his remains, and it's going to be a lengthy process to determine who the remains belong to. And then a week later, they knew exactly whose remains it was, they said. Why may they have said that it was going to be a lengthy process, and then in 7 days we know?
It's hard you don't want to jump the gun until you're 100% right. So you don't want the media to get out in front of, notifying the parent, notifying anybody who might be next of kin or a relative to let them know what had happened. So the wording is a little wanky. I wouldn't have went as far as to say, hey, it's going to be a while. It doesn't take that long. Everyone kind of knew, unfortunately, who it was right up front because of the size, the location, the probably decay that fits in the time frame of his disappearance. So, the wording was a little bad, but that happens during press conferences with cases like this.
So when news broke and they announced that the remains do belong to Elijah, unfortunately, we heard that information, but not really much else. Investigators said, okay, it's no longer an Amber Alert, it's no longer a missing boy or missing person, but it's going to be shifted into a death investigation. That wording is very specific to me. They didn't say homicide, they just said death. What are your thoughts on that part?
Well, and that's the proper terminology because listen, let's play devil's advocate. Let's play it down the middle. Let's say the young boy did just walk away from the house and get lost, and then just the elements got to him being the age that he was, and that's the cause of death. We don't know that yet until it's determined, through the autopsy and the investigation of the remains. So I'm kind of good with that because you want to be right when you're dealing with this, and they'll be able to determine either way whether natural causes or a murder.
So finally, at this press conference, Northeast Wisconsin and really the world that's been following this case got some answers that these are Elijah's remains. But after that, the investigators didn't say much else. They said, we're not going to be answering any questions, and then they promptly just left.
As a reminder, we will not be having questions at this time as we already shared all the information we are available.
And the reporters there were kind of yelling, are there going to be charges? What about an autopsy? Things like that. And the police just walked away. Why may they have done that?
Well, because you don't want to give up what you have. There may be a whole host of things that the investigators have already that they were not or are still not ready to disclose because it's still an ongoing investigation. Now it just steps up to a possible homicide, a death investigation. So they may have already collected evidence pointing to one or two people in the event they did find the remains and it was confirmed that it was a homicide, to then start the charging process through the district attorney's office. So I'm okay with them doing that. And I understand them not getting in to a Q&A because you don't want to give up what you already have.
I mean, the question everybody's asking, though, is whether Elijah's mother and his mother's boyfriend have any involvement, but they were never even mentioned at this press conference. So we're just kind of inferring that these two things are connected. Is it possible that they are or aren't?
Yeah, either way, it was very odd that nothing was brought up about them, and maybe that's why they walked away so quick because they didn't want to answer any questions about where the investigation is going as far as the mother and the boyfriend go. There might be somebody else that they're looking at as well that might have had a hand in this. We don't know, and that will play out because this investigation is going to get jacked up pretty quick into bringing justice to this little boy. And if it means the mother and the boyfriend, so be it. And I hope they do come to a conclusion.
I know that they both face charges of child abuse, which are obviously horrific. Reading through the criminal complaint is just even hard to stomach. But if this little boy did die as a result of homicide, obviously those are the charges that the DA is going to hopefully pursue to get justice for Elijah and the rest of the community. So, what would it take for them to add additional charges to both the mother and the boyfriend of homicide?
Well, if this was my case, the cause of death, if they can determine one, and then start playing each of them against one another. Start playing the mother against the boyfriend against the mother, and see what happens. Who's ready to make a deal? Who? That's how you're going to get to the bottom of this is through interrogations, through interviews. There's one very interesting thing that I read when it came to the boyfriend. He had mentioned that right before he took a nap and slept for 3 hours when Elijah disappeared, he had him stand next to the bed as punishment. What was that punishment? So he's already putting ahead that something happened in that house that caused him to react to punish, quote unquote, Elijah. That's going to be very important, I think, in the statement that he made going forward. What happened for him to make that statement about punishment?
And you talked about the investigation or interrogation of both the mom and the boyfriend. Obviously, this has been done already. I know that when they were arrested, they obviously were questioned in some way, and it's been 7 months since they were arrested and since Elijah went missing. So why now would things change and they suddenly may open up?
Because they have a body. That makes all the difference in the world. Criminals get into a comfort zone of maybe not discovering the body after X amount of months. And you kind of let your guard down, like, okay, they're not going to find them. Then they do, and that changes the ball game dramatically on every level, from interrogation, from evidence you're going to collect, from interviews, witnesses, all that. It all changes once that body is found.
Jesse Vang is charged with chronic neglect of a child as a party to a crime. Katrina Baur faces the same charge, as well as 2 counts of resisting or obstructing an officer and a second child neglect charge. So when I'm thinking about those things, obviously there's a lot of text messages that show kind of questionable parenting tactics, to say the very least. But as far as I know, we don't have physical proof of this as of yet. We don't know about his remains, but we don't have that as of now. We don't have any video or pictures or things like that. So just that charge alone, the child abuse ones, are those going to be difficult to prove?
I don't. That's a good question. That's a really good question. That's going to be up to what the district attorney knows and the history of this family. Are there past incidences that the police will call to that location? Were there 911 calls? Were there anonymous calls? School, anything that they're not ready to release yet that are going to play a part in this investigation? The other part, Sierra, that's interesting is finding the blanket of this boy 3 miles away. So now they can, with finding the remains, start a pattern with finding that blanket. Where was it in comparison to where the body was found? Is there a road there? Was a direct line from their house to there? That's going to play another big role in this, because that is a piece of evidence that is away from the house that now they can link up to the boy's body in comparison of where it is and points of travel.
You mentioned the blanket, which obviously was a key piece of information that we got a while back before the remains were found. And that kind of got me thinking about the remains, if possibly there was anything there, shoes, clothes, whatever it may be. They haven't made any mention of that as of yet, but is it possible that he did have clothes or shoes or things there?
Oh, absolutely. And you would think, again, you hope, there's more evidence that they can gather to put, the people responsible for this in jail forever. Mother, the boyfriend, someone else, whatever. No one deserves a deal in this. I just want to clarify that from something I said before. I don't want the mom to get off. I don't want the boyfriend to get off just because they gave that up. That's not the point of this. The point is getting the person responsible for who committed this crime. And if there was someone else involved, get them as well.
There's still so many questions. I know a lot of people are thinking potentially he left the day he went missing. Somehow he was outside of the apartment, whatever circumstances they may be, but that Elijah did die that day. But I'm wondering, is it possible that it wasn't right away? That someone else, as you said, could have been involved? It could have been months or weeks down the line, those kind of things.
Oh yeah, all of that plays into this whole horrible case because let's just say again, we don't know who was involved. If someone knows that property was already searched and then put the body there, that could be. There's so many factors that go into this, and we just at this point don't know a lot. The press conference was more about identifying or locating the body and letting everyone know, but nothing really on the investigation. So right now we're kind of scratching our head a little about where this is going to go in the next steps in this investigation. And I'm really curious to see where it goes.
We keep talking about this theme that there's so many unanswered questions. I mean, now we have remains, but we don't know cause of death, time of death. There's no additional charges. All of those things, I'm wondering why there still are so many unanswered questions, because I know investigators, detectives have to know more than they're letting on, even about the child abuse allegations. So why is it that we, the public, haven't been told more information?
Well, and you're exactly right about that. There is more that they know. And coming from doing that for 30 years, I understand that part. And here's why. Because there might be someone that they don't have presently that might be involved in this. So you don't want to lead the bad guy into any potential evidence that the police are going to let out there about, their investigation. You want to keep it really close knit, close to yourself until it's ready or you have enough to maybe go get someone that hasn't been mentioned yet. Right now, there's going to be a follow up to this for sure, because there's going to be so much that's going to come out of this. And I hope it does, because it has to be out there. This is an important story that has to be out there and everyone be aware of. It's heartbreaking, and the people that are responsible for this need to face justice. For Elijah.
Both Jesse Vang and Katrina Baur still are not charged in Elijah's disappearance or death, but for the child neglect charges, they both pleaded not guilty. Vang will be back in court on September 27th and Baur on October 22nd. For Law and Crime, I'm Gillespie.